I mean, I think I've told this story before, and I don't want to bore Tanner with it, but I will bore you with it. When I did this show called The Show, and just a little bit of trivia. It's not Name Drop Friday, but the booked on that show, there were 3 white people on the show and about 7 or 8 black people. And I played the whitehead writer of a fake black talk show who was played by, I can't remember what his character's name was, Wilson Lee. He was played by a guy named Maestro Clark, who went on, I think, to at one point host Soul Train. And with their, the character had a team of writers. One was Chris Spencer, who hosted, I think it was Vibe, like there was a talk show put out by Vibe at one point. There was a couple of other writers, I can't remember their names, but I think one woman was on, had been on In Living Color. And then the lead of the show, Maestro, had a posse that just hung around with him, made up of 4 or 5 guys. One guy who had been on Martin, another guy, Sully McCullough, who I had known because he was one of the few guys who had sort of also ran in that same circle of comedians, you know, the sort of alt comedians at the time that I was hanging around with. The guy who I brought on to the show, my character brought on to the show, was played by Paul Giamatti in the pilot. And Fox was like, this guy's just not right. And they didn't lock him up in a contract. They're idiots. And I was married in the first 2 episodes of it, which were written and shot before the show went on to air. And these Warner Brother executives, I swear to you, they thought that this was going to be the next Friends. I mean, I remember just walking, Warner Brothers Studios, a huge lot, and walking down the lot, and it just seemed like out of the blue, like I'd have Warner Brother executives riding up to me on a golf cart, wanting to take me places, and to the commissary, and I would be eating. Many times being behind line, and David Schwimmer and what was her, Rachel, whoever played Rachel, I can't remember her name.
Never seen Friends.
Talking Jennifer Aniston.
Jennifer Aniston and that type of thing. And so the first day, so we had a pre-table read of the script, and I got the script and I'm reading about it, and Wilson Lee's character, the sort of the Martin of the show, who was basically playing, Martin in this whole sort of meta thing that was happening, because, like I say, the EP of this show had EP'd Martin. He had this posse, like I say, and the names of the guys in the posse, like it was like T. Reginald Smith, and one of the names in the posse was this guy was Big Fruity. And I remember reading this before I went into the table read and just going, oh God, what have I got myself into? This is so over the top. It seems almost like offensive to me. It's talking about how like the posse had to get rid of their guns before they came on set. And I was like, oh God, man, this is going to be, what have I done? And we get to the table read, and we're all sitting around this big table, and I meet all of these comedians who have done very well, but I've never seen them or heard of them. They're like working in a parallel universe in Hollywood. And before the table read starts, the executive producer, who I think actually was or has gone on to have been the president of the WGA, I think. I'm not sure. A guy named John Bowman. And like I say, the guy who went on to write 12 Years a Slave was there, and another guy, Matt Wickline, and Larry Elmore from who was on The Daily Show. He was one of the writers as well. And I I think there was those 4 guys were the primary writers. Maybe there was one other guy. But so I'm sitting at the table and I'm just like, I don't know about this whole thing. And Bowman, I think it was, says, you'll notice in the script we've changed the name of Big Fruity to Big Chewy. And I was just thinking to myself, that's not necessarily a net gain for... And he goes on to... And all the black guys around the table nod their head like knowingly and like, yeah, huh? And I'm like, what's going on here? And he announces to the whole table that, of course, this is because we heard from Big Fruity, who apparently was the lead guy in the Eddie Murphy posse, that he was not happy with this. And so they had to change it. And everybody's like, yeah, because I subsequently found out you don't mess with Big Fruity, because the guy is famous for going around with his gun and getting into people's faces. And that at the taping of Martin, and, I had done, at this point, I think only one other sitcom, which was All American Girl. But I had been to other sitcom, tapings because, that's what you do when your friends are on sitcoms. And our sitcom, and apparently at Martin, had a metal detector. And at Martin, apparently, there was a box of guns that they would collect from, friends of the show, essentially. You can't go on the set with a gun. And that was, and I was just like, I had no idea. And in the whole process of the show, we had one script where there was a prayer meeting, that I had read the script in advance, where there were prayer meetings before we did the show. And in fact, it was what we did before every show. We got into a prayer meeting, and it was something I had never experienced on a white show. Subsequent to that, never had seen it, never even heard of it.
So that's why we do that before the show here.
That's why. That's where I picked up that habit.
I just needed context for why we do it.
It was also awkward for me because I was also, I think, the only non-Christian on the show.
But not only a non-Christian, but really an early leader in the war against Christmas. And
that's right. Well, at that time, it was still brewing.
A hater of the Christian faith generally.
And sadly, I think the network lost its stomach for the attempt to integrate those two worlds of comedy. And by the 3rd or 4th show, it became just not nearly as edgy in its ambitions. I don't know if it was ever edgy in its execution, but it wasn't nearly as edgy in its ambitions. And but even still, when it got canceled, I think I thought I was happy. And then subsequent to that, I realized this would have been great because for a brief period of time, the only people I would be recognized by were by African Americans. And it was just a fascinating, I think I've told the story about hanging out with Chris Spencer and going back to his house in Hollywood during, we would take lunch breaks, and an experience when a buddy has pulled into Spencer's underground lot, or parking garage, driving a Range Rover and talking about how he's been pulled over 4 times this week by the LA cops. And he had actually called the cops to see if he could get a sticker on his vehicle saying, I own this car. And the guy who answered the phone was just like, "Are you black? There's nothing we can do." I'm sorry, And then the other funny part about that was Chris Spencer, literally, I was riding my bike from Hollywood to Studio City, which was perilous because you literally almost had to go on a highway, and I was renting this really crappy rent-a-wreck and getting paid. I think at the time I was making $25,000 a week, but it was so recent that I had been living on less than that a year that I was just like, I'm banking this money. And some of the guys are like Chris Spencer was like embarrassed the way I was dressing, and I have barely moved the needle on how I dress, but he literally went out and bought me a couple of sets of clothes, like chinos and some button-down shirts, because he was just like, you gotta learn how to dress. I never did, but it was a really interesting experience that I think it would have been even more fascinating had the show. I mean, we were only in production for, I think, about 8 months, 6 months. I don't know what it was, but it would have been fascinating for me personally, and probably not so much for America. But all right. That said, we're gonna, because like I say,
I would like to.
I will say this. I mean, this was also fascinating to me. One of my comedic heroes at the time was Chris Elliott. And Matt Wittline, who was one of the writers on the show, was good buddies with Chris Elliott and who had written on Letterman. And Chris Elliott did a guest role in the show. And I remember, like, there was a scene where I walk into Wilson Lee's office, the fake host of this fake talk show, and sitting in his chair is Chris Elliott, and with his back to the audience, live audience, right? And he rotates the chair to reveal it's Chris Elliott. And during rehearsal, the whole week, I was like, I got to remember to take like a pause, because the audience is going to go crazy, because like, particularly even at that time, it's like, maybe it was after Cabin Boy. I'm not exactly sure, but I was just like, I just thought he was like, for me, this was like Chris Elliott. This is the pinnacle for me. And so we're taping the show. I walk in the door. He spins, not a peep from the audience. They have no idea who the guy is. And it was just, he that night, I think we had pre-mixed store-bought screwdrivers in his trailer to drive him home. And he just said to me, he said, good luck on this. But
pre-bought, pre-mixed store-bought screwdrivers.
Yeah.
That's the most bizarre thing I've heard this whole
they
50
came
minutes.
in like, I don't think they still have them, but they came in like,
Jesus.
It was not glamorous. I drove him back to his hotel. I think he dry heaved in my car. It was all right. Well, folks,
Seeing Sam's pitch for keeping the show on after the ratings are bad to the executives, like, I'm learning a lot.
I don't
I'm
think
getting new clothes bought
at
for
the
me.
time, I don't think I appreciated it, because I don't think I was conscious of just, when I got on that show was December. I think I got booked December of 95. And I had only been a year out of Boston, and I had been in New York for a brief time. And, Boston was fairly cloistered. I was literally a year from working 4 hours a day at a Chinese restaurant, 5 hours a day at a Chinese restaurant, and living in a 3/4 way house that was, costing me like $250 a month with no bathroom in the apartment. You had to go down the hall and share it with the other people living in the building. And so I didn't realize what a unique experience I was having in the context of Hollywood. I just didn't. It didn't occur. I had no sort of experience in that world to realize, like, I never saw any of those people who were on that show at another audition ever again. And, the experience for a while I was there, I'd go into an audition room and it would be like, hey, what's up? Like I would, and it was fascinating.